I'm Jim with Pour the Juice, and today I wanted to talk about how to develop your whiskey palate. Um, I've done some other how-tos so far, which include how to start collecting whiskey, and that's always an interesting one, but it's kind of simple. Uh, the way to develop your palate's a little bit more complex, a little bit more fun. That's really where you start to love whiskey or love a type of whiskey at least. Um, and I wanted to do this video for a long time. Um, this actually may have been the beginning of when I thought I wanted to start a whiskey channel. And it came a couple years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. Not sure the timeline. I tried looking up this video and I couldn't find it. ADHD Whiskey had come out with a video, and he was talking about how to find peanut notes in a whiskey. I don't know if he was trying to figure out how to find peanut notes in a whiskey, or it was how he originally did. But the moral of the video was he started talking about OGD 114, Old Granddad 114, and how that's the perfect whiskey to try to find those beam peanut notes. And I went out and I bought a bottle of that whiskey. I had never tried it previous to that video. And up to that video, I couldn't pull out specific notes. I hadn't dove that far back into whiskey yet where I was able to do so. And so I thought, why the hell not? Let me go try it. And I bought a bottle of it. And lo and behold, he was right. And I was super excited because it's the first time I ever got a specific note like that out of a bean product, out of any whiskey. I thought that was really cool. And in that video, ADHD Whiskey mentioned that he may continue doing videos similar to that one in the future. That he wanted to kind of make a trail of how to develop your flavor palette, of how to get different notes in whiskey. And I thought that would have been really, really interesting. I don't think he ever did it. I tried looking for it. I tried looking for that one with OGD, and I couldn't find that one either. But I thought that would be such a cool idea. That's one of the reasons why I had just made what does a Ratafia de Champagne finish taste like? I think it's interesting to know what certain whiskeys taste like. And I think it's really interesting to try to find those notes on your own. And when you do, it's so cool. So I wanted to put this little video together to try to give as much information as I can to make that easier for you, the audience. And of course, my number one tip on how to develop your whiskey palate is going to be an obvious one, and that's going to be to drink more whiskey. The more whiskey that you taste, the more whiskey that you pay attention to tasting, I should say. If you're just out there blackout drunk, ripping shots, you probably won't develop much. But if you're paying attention to the whiskey that you're drinking, if you have a game plan going into that, on trying different whiskeys and trying to remember those whiskeys that you tasted, and paying attention to, notes when you're trying all these different whiskeys, that's going to go a long way to developing your palate. If you go out and buy whiskey and you look up notes on what those whiskeys are supposed to taste like, a lot of times I don't even look at the official notes because I feel like those are a little misleading, especially coming from Scotch. Coming from Scotch, you'd see some wild notes. I could never get half of those because as much as I enjoy Scotch, most Scotch tastes like a high malt whiskey. And high malt whiskeys tend to give you a few big flavor profiles, and then it gets way more nuanced and more difficult to taste if you're not trained, in my opinion, at least. But again, I remember the first one I got with Scotch too. It was a Dalmore 12, and I got a coffee note off of it, and I thought it was so cool. Anyway, drink more whiskey. But my second, bigger tip, if you really want to start developing your flavor, your whiskey palate, for tasting is to get a tasting glass. Glencairn, it's not a, it's fairly cheap, I guess, especially if you're going to start using it a lot. I would recommend getting 2 of these. I would get 2 Glencairns, and this leads up to my third big tip, which is going to be to compare whiskeys simultaneously. And that's going to be the biggest one for me, at least. That's what helped me the most when trying to develop my palate for whiskey, was I started comparing them. And I didn't do it right at first. I would compare something that was 80 proof to something that was 120 proof. And you learn some lessons that way, but you don't learn too much. When I first started comparing whiskeys, I would sit there with my dad, and we'd try a scotch, and then we'd try a bourbon, and then we'd try another scotch, and then another bourbon. That makes it difficult for those, nuances to hit your profile too. But it does help. You can try tasting different types of whiskey to begin with and see which of those general palates match yours the most. You try with different mash bills. If you want to try a wheat whiskey and then a bourbon, maybe you also want to try a high wheat bourbon, or high rye if you want to look at ryes too. There's so many different types of whiskey out there. So subtype is definitely something that you could try comparing. Within distilleries, I think is very interesting to compare. I brought one here for this video. We have Buffalo Trace Sazerac Rye. This one's a store-picked Sazerac Rye, but this is an interesting one because you get to try 2 from the same distillery. They're relatively cheap. And then you have one that's a low rye bourbon and one that is a rye in Sazerac. And the Sazerac rye it smells great, but it's very friendly to new drinkers. If you are just getting into whiskey, just getting into bourbon, and you think you don't like rye, or you've heard certain things about rye that makes you think you wouldn't like it, especially if you like low proof whiskeys, I would suggest grabbing a bottle of Sazerac Rye, because this is $25, around there at least, if you can find them in your area. I don't think there's any secondary prices on it. They're pretty easy to obtain. But yeah, so let's compare. We compare them side by side. I don't know if I could do this if it was just me drinking the Sazerac Rye. Just drinking Sazerac Rye on my own, I get Buffalo Trace out of it. I can get hints of the rye, but when you compare them side by side, those differences really grow. Delicious. Even tasting it after smelling the Buffalo Trace, those differences are even larger than what they normally would be for me. And so you could do that. And you can taste the difference between a rye and a bourbon. And then if you want to, you can go down the same path, different types. I didn't bring that bottle over with me, but Buffalo Trace is a specific mash bill. If you wanted to, you could stay with that same mash bill and just go up a proof. You can compare Buffalo Trace to E.H. Taylor, which is the same mash bill. different ages, um, different proof. And then you could compare that to stag. Same thing, same mash bill, different ages, different proof. And sort of see what you find out of that. There's just endless possibilities for comparing whiskeys to each other. But my last tip on this would be to have a plan going into those comparisons. I mean, you don't have to. Just pick a couple whiskeys and drink them and say, "Ooh, I like that one better than that one." But if you're trying to develop your palate, I do think having a plan going into a comparison is very helpful. So if I was going to this one, my plan would be to taste the difference between a rye and a bourbon. Or if I was going to do Buffalo Trace and E.H. Taylor or E.H. Taylor and Stag, I'd want to know what I get out of that higher proof. Or if I'm comparing Buffalo Trace to Jim Beam, maybe I want to find that peanut note, or I want to find that grape note, or cherry cola out of Stag, whatever it is. Or even if you want to try to find the different notes you get out of finishes, I think that's really interesting and really helpful as well. Those Bowman bottles are really cool. If I'm thinking about it correctly, the regular Bowman, I forget the name of it, it's just a standard whiskey. And then, they also have the port finish with it as well. Compare the port to the normal one. Get to see what a port finish tastes like and see if you like that sort of thing. And, finished whiskeys are a little bit easier to get those notes. Yeah, that's going to be the end of this video. I think that's all the tips I had for developing your palate. My last one, we have to try some things out. Try out a Sazerac Rye Buffalo Trace combination. And maybe it'll be your favorite out of the whiskeys that you tried that night. And then you can see, when you're doing that, how the blend affects your palate. And then you can start blending too, do little blends. You start getting used to certain bottles, and you say, "Hey, I think this would go really good with this." An Elijah Craig barrel proof is great. But I think a little bit of a Woodford double oak added into that would really be fantastic. I don't know. Whiskey World Zero Oyster. It's pretty good. All right, that's the end. If you enjoyed, please like, please subscribe. In the comments below, please let me know what other types of videos you'd like to see if you enjoyed this one. I know they're a little basic, but when I was getting into whiskey, I needed to see some of those basic videos. Hope this helps somebody out. Thank you.